on Government Orders of the Day numbers 7 to 10.
Sorry. Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-16 Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill, Committee Stage. Weathertight Homes Resolution Services Amendment Bill, Committee Stage. Radio New Zealand Amendment Bill, Committee Stage continued. Health Protection Amendment Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of the Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-16 Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill, for further consideration of the Weathertight Homes Resolution Services Amendment Bill and the Radio New Zealand Amendment Bill, and consideration of the Health Protection Amendment Bill. Mr Chairman.
Members, the House is in committee for the consideration of the Taxation Annual Rates for the 2015-16 Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill, for further consideration of the Weathertight Homes Resolution Services Amendment Bill and the Radio New Zealand Amendment Bill, and for consideration of the Health Protection Amendment Bill. And members, we come first to the Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-16 Research and Development and Remedial Matters Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I'm pleased to take the first call of what I'm sure will be many on the Taxation Annual Rates for 2015-2016 Research, Development and Remedial Matters Bill. As the title of the bill, as exciting and interesting as it sounds, indicates, the bill covers a wide range of topics. The one that Part 1, which you have called us on, deals with is the matter of child support payments. Mr Chair, it's important when we look into this part that we know what the context of this is, and it's very well covered, I might say, in the regulatory impact statement for this particular piece of legislation. And I want to cover in my first contribution on this part the background to why these amendments have been put up, and then I want to look at three particular areas where the Minister and the Select Committee have both looked at and recommended some amendments. They're around the question of relief from payment, the question of the timing of the implementation of various parts of this part, and the changes around sole parent students. Before I do that though, Mr Chair, I do think it is important to understand the context of these changes. There won't be many members of Parliament who, or either in their role as MPs or as individuals, who haven't had issues raised with them about child support payments. It is a regular topic. I can see Mr Barclay nodding in his various constituency offices across the lower half of the South Island. He will have had people come into his office with concerns about aspects of child support payments. Certainly nobody on this side of the House, I'm sure, will be saying that the child support payment regime is perfect. It does need change, and the review that was undertaken that built up to this legislation was needed and timely. Generally speaking, Mr Chair, I would characterise the issues and complaints that have come to MPs or have been raised in public would be in the category of those who are paying parents feeling that they are unfairly contributing, that they're contributing above and beyond what they should be relative to the amount of time they spend caring for children, and those on the receiving end being concerned about the level of payment that they're receiving, the times and occasions when people don't make the payments that they should make. And it's worth noting that there's around $3 billion worth of child support debt at the moment in New Zealand. 75% of that debt is actually in penalties. And a big chunk of those penalties are of more than a year's owing. So that represents clearly a system that has not been working properly if you just look at it in terms of the amount of money that's been paid over and the number of people who are failing to meet their obligations. So, as I say, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind, Mr Chair, that the review around these issues were timely. Where concerns were raised with me, and where I think a Minister and the Chair may care to take a call to help explain whether or not this legislation will deal with these problems, we're in the process of change. So what we've got is everything's out of kilter in terms of dates, Mr Chair, because of the complete disorganisation of the Leader of the House, failing to get legislation flowing through this House in order to meet timelines. I know you'll be surprised by that, Mr Cosgrove, failing to meet timelines that have been set. Most of the reform package has actually been in operation since the 1st of April this year, and we're now passing the legislation to try and make that work today in the House. There are other elements of the legislation that come into force on the 1st of April 2016, and that's a timely intervention, but a big chunk of the reforms have already been implemented. And I'll give the example, Mr Chair, of a case that came in front to me in my electorate office, where the change in criteria, the change in process for child support payments led to a situation where there was a rebalancing of who was paying in a relationship. And I believe, Mr Chair, on balance, that was a fairer rebalancing. We had a person who had traditionally been the total payer to somebody becoming only a part payer, and the person who had previously been receiving taking more responsibility. It was a complicated situation. Each of the parents had new partners. That then led to other considerations that come into play there. But, Mr Chair,
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. But that particular person who came to see me in my office came because, as part of this new process, she had a protection order against her former partner, and as part of this process, her former partner was now in possession of all of her income details, because that was part of the new process. And she said to me, how can one part of the state want to protect me from my partner, but the other part was handing over my income details to that person? That is a system that still needs work, Mr Chair, and there have been others who've come in with very strange criteria or very strange calculations based on the new criteria. So I think it would be useful to the House for a member of the government to get up and talk about what lies behind these changes, and are they satisfied that we now have a fairer system? Because, Mr Chair, I'm not yet certain of that. What I can say, and what the committee considered, were some changes that I think are useful. And here I would like to refer to section 44 of the new Act. This means that the regime around penalty payments now includes the ability for the Commissioner of Inland Revenue to consider a wider set of measures as to whether or not there should be write-offs. This is a good thing, Mr Chair, because up to now it's effectively been a question of the efficient use of resources as opposed to the position that a parent finds themselves in, or more importantly, what that means for the child in this case. So section 44 now includes the idea of whether the recovery of incremental penalties would place the liable person in serious hardship. That is actually an important factor to be able to put into play. It will, I hope, if it's implemented properly, actually mean a more realistic assessment of the penalties. And as I mentioned before, if 75% of the $3 billion child support debt in New Zealand is made up of penalties, then hopefully this will actually create a more reasonable period of place. So I think under section 44, we can say that that is a useful thing. But, Mr Chair, I want to, in the remaining part of this call, just come back to the wider context of these child support changes. We are talking about, and the committee has been told, that we are now talking about approaching $200 million to implement these changes. The original costing was $30 million. Remarkably, the Inland Revenue Department didn't consider that there might be a capital cost with these changes. They thought it would all be operational, and then they realised they were actually fundamentally changing the system, and they actually needed to budget for capital, and it blew out. It actually blew out to 200 million. They've done some phasing and a little bit of jiggery-pokery, and it's back to $163 million. But that is still a massive, massive blowout. And let's bear in mind that Treasury and the State Services Commission said to the government, you should align these child support changes with the overall business transformation program at IRD, a nearly $2 billion program, I suspect, by the time that actually comes into place. And it will continue to rise, that's right, Mr Cosgrove. And what we haven't seen from the government is a realistic assessment of whether or not these child support changes should have been put through at this time, or whether they should have been aligned with the overall business transformation program. And I think it is incumbent on the government to get up in this House and tell New Zealanders why they have overseen a massive, over $100 million blowout in the cost of these child support changes that have been implemented in Part 1 of this bill. Because that is actually poor government, it's inefficient, it's a waste of money, at the same time at which the system itself is still creaking along. Make the changes. By all means, let's improve this part of the system. Everybody in New Zealand can see that it's not working properly, but don't do that in a rushed way to look good and then have a massive expenditure blowout. And it's hugely disappointing when the government has its advisors, Treasury, State Services Commission, who are supposed to provide them with the advice about good government, about efficient government, and what they actually end up doing is saying, no, we're going to ignore that for political reasons. The blowouts happened under our watch. We want to make sure it doesn't look as bad as that. We'll phase the expenditure, a bit of creative accounting. But actually, in reality, the child support system is struggling and the taxpayer is going to find themselves severely out of pocket as a result. So I would like some government members to get on their feet and address those two issues. Have we now got child support right, and why did the expenditure blow out?
Fletcher,